Today, we're digging into something fascinating and honestly super important in the world of breast cancer diagnosis. We're looking at a study that reveals how a single medical term can actually describe two completely different diseases, and that confusion can have life or death consequences. All right, let's get into it. So, let's start with a big question. Can one official medical diagnosis be, well, dangerously misleading? I mean, when you get a diagnosis, you expect it to mean one specific thing, right? But what happens when that name is actually a mask for two totally different culprits? The diagnosis at the heart of our story is classic invasive lobular carcinoma. Now, the official definition from the World Health Organization describes what these cells look like under a microscope. They're disconnected, and they often line up in these single-file patterns. Looking at this, you think, okay, that's one very specific thing. But as you're about to see, that's only a tiny piece of a much, much bigger picture. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll see how one name is hiding two cancers. Then we're going to open up two case files to look at the evidence ourselves. After that, we'll check out the survival numbers, and that's where the real impact hits home. And finally, we'll talk about why the researchers are calling for a big change in how we name these diseases. You see, the whole problem boils down to this. Even if the cancer cells look similar up close, under a microscope, modern imaging like mammograms tells two completely different stories. It's kind of like the difference between looking at a single grain of sand and seeing the entire beach. Okay, let's open our first case file. We'll call this one the diffuse invader. This is the more aggressive, widespread version of the cancer. The researchers have a more technical name for it, extralobular BCMO, but diffuse invader really captures what it does. Let's look at the evidence. And this right here, this is exactly what we're talking about. These are mammograms, and what you'll notice is there's no obvious lump. Instead, the tissue itself just looks distorted, kind of pulled together over a huge area. It's a subtle change, but it's massive. It's like something is spreading, almost sneakingly, throughout the tissue. Now, check this out. This slide shows us what that distortion on the mammogram actually is. This is a huge slice of the tissue, stained so the cancer shows up in pink. And you can see it's not a round tumor. It's this enormous, sprawling network that has infiltrated the tissue. In this case, it measured a staggering 75 by 70 millimeters. It's a full-on invasion. So the key takeaway for our first case file is this. The diffuse invader is defined by its spread. It doesn't form a neat little ball. It creeps through the tissue almost like vines, which makes it really hard to see, hard to measure, and, as we'll find out, much more dangerous. All right, time for our second case file. Let's call this one the contained colony. The researchers are suggesting the name intralobular BCMO for this one. Now get ready, because the difference between this and what we just saw is, well, it's night and day. And here you have it. This one slide really tells the whole story. On the left, that's the huge, blurry distortion of the diffuse invader we just looked at. But on the right, a totally different picture. It's a tiny, single, star-shaped tumor. This one is less than 10 millimeters across. They literally have the same diagnosis, but they look nothing alike. So let's zoom in on this contained colony. On the left, you've got a magnified mammogram showing that little star-like mass. And on the right, you see the actual tissue slide that corresponds to it. It's a distinct, localized little spot. It's not spreading everywhere. It's just what it sounds like, a small, contained colony of cancer cells. And just to show you this isn't a one-off, here's another example. Again, a small tumor, this time a little more circular, but still under 10 millimeters. This one was just found during a routine screening. So the pattern is clear. This type is consistently small, localized, and well-defined. It's the visual and biological polar opposite of the diffuse invader. Okay, so we've seen two cancers that look completely different. But why does this matter so much? I mean, really matter. Because the way they look on an image translates into a huge difference in patient survival. And this is where the story gets incredibly real. This chart right here, this is the climax of our investigation. It tracks patient survival over almost 20 years. That blue line way up at the top, that's for patients with the small, contained colony type. And the orange line down at the bottom, that's for patients with the diffuse invader. Just look at how dramatically those lines separate over time. Let's put some hard numbers on those lines. After 19 years, 84% of patients with the small contained cancer are still alive. That's great. But for patients with a large diffuse cancer who got the exact same diagnosis, that number plummets to just 56%. That is a massive difference in outcome, all hidden by one misleading name. To get statistical for a second, the study found a hazard ratio of 4.68. What that basically means is that at any point in time, a patient with the diffuse type of cancer was almost 5 times more likely to die from it than a patient with the contained type. A 5-fold difference. You just can't ignore that. So this massive difference in how the cancer behaves and what it means for the patient is exactly what led the researchers to make a very clear recommendation. They argue that if we want to give people the right treatment and save lives, we have to stop using one name for two very different things. We need new names. And their proposed solution is actually pretty simple and logical. For that diffuse cancer that spreads outside the breast's little structures, they suggest the name extralobular BCMO. And for the small localized cancer that stays contained inside those structures, they propose intralobular BCMO. The names finally match the reality of what we can see in the images. And the stakes here are just so high. The researchers put it very plainly in this quote from their study. Using the same specific term to describe these two separate entities can adversely affect management decisions. Think about what that means. A patient with the less aggressive type might get overtreated, while a patient with the much deadlier type might be undertreated, all because of one ambiguous name. You know, this whole investigation leaves us with a final, really thought-provoking question. If two cancers this different could hide behind one name for this long, how many other diseases might be out there, hiding in plain sight? It's just a powerful reminder that as our technology gets better and we can see things more clearly, we have to be willing to update our old definitions to match our new reality.